Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're going to be discussing the Lightning Overdrive World Premiers and the imports to the TCG. The first card is Proof of Proofless. It's a level 3 dark attribute fiend type effect monster with 100 attack and defense. Its effect is if you control no special summoned monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, you cannot special summon other monsters for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect of Proof of Proofless once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can immediately after this effect resolves, tribute summon one monster. This card is actually quite useful and very decent. It does work against the strategy of special summoning, so if your deck tends to be more of a normal summon, such as Monarchs, it's actually very useful. If anything, it actually works relatively well with Monarchs because it allows you to then go into an instant tribute summon. So you can go into something like Zaborg, Mobius, Thestalos, Grandmarg, whichever one you, and then use its effect within the same turn. You don't have many examples of this, and it's definitely something that can be splashed into a number of these tribute-heavy decks. Thron, the Discipled Angel, is a level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type effect monster with 1500 attack and 600 defense. The effect, if a monster that was originally an Earth Attribute Fairy type is sent from your hand or field to the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only use this effect of Thron, the Discipled Angel, once per turn. So this is meant to work in alongside with Ishizu Ishtar's archetype because those are all Earth Attribute Fairy type monsters. And I'm sure there's a couple of those that have abilities that work within the hand. I know the Agent of Earth actually works from the hand as well, and I'm sure there's probably some other examples that will let you special summon this card. Whilst this is an okay effect, it's just to special summon itself, and it's very specific within a very niche type of deck, so I wouldn't consider running it. Pendant Draction is a rank 4 water attribute Cyvers type effect monster with 2000 attack and 1000 defense. It requires 2 level 4 monsters to summon it, and its effect is you can detach one material from this card. If you have more cards in your extra deck than your opponents, apply these effects in sequence depending on the difference. 1. This card gains 1000 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. 5. Neither player can target this card with card effects until the end of your opponent's turn. 10. Banish one card your opponent controls. And 15. Make your opponent's life points 3000. You can only use this effect of pen transaction once per turn. This is a very unusual type of card because to get the maximum of its effects, your opponent essentially doesn't have to be running an extra deck, or you must have basically ripped out their entire extra deck before you use up any of your cards. This is based on the difference between yours and your opponent's, so this is really reliant on your opponent to have nothing, or be on a very Monarch heavy deck, or one that just can't special summon if certain cards are activated. The first part of the effect, gaining 1000 attack, okay, this becomes a 3000 attack monster. Big deal, okay, it's good for a rank 4 that requires 2 generic level 4s to summon, that's fine. And it's probably more difficult to kind of get over, especially since it lasts until at least your opponent's end of your opponent's turn, so it does deal with the whole transition between turns. If it had been only during your turn, I would be very concerned about it, because it would then lose its stat boost as soon as you end your turn. The second part, neither player can target this with card effects until the end of the opponent's turn, is also a decent enough effect. It's fine if you've already kind of protected this card, that's okay. But it's nothing to kind of be that considerate about. It's fine as an effect. There are better cards that can actually do this. 10. Banish one card your opponent controls. It can be the spell, trap, or monster. Also very good. Most cards that are banished don't tend to be recovered unless you're running very specific types of deck. So it's one way of preventing your opponent from recurring with certain cards. And if it's 15 or more, you can make your opponent's life points 3000. Brilliant at the start of a duel because you're able to then cut their opponent's life points to less than half. It's a decent effect and definitely a decent monster I wouldn't skip over, but it's very situational and it could become one of those Xyz monsters that's very forgettable. Expendable die is a normal trap card with the effect tribute one warrior type monster, then target one card on the field, destroy it, and if you do, draw one card. This reminds me of Unexpected Die, which basically special summons a normal type monster from your deck to the field. I think it has to be level 4 or lower, so that's the condition on it. This is meant to work with Digrapher, who is a 1700 attack monster. It's a level 4 that's a normal monster as well, and you get rid of one card on your opponent's field, and then you'll draw a card. So it's replacing everything that's used against it. You're not gaining anything. In fact, you're probably losing something from this effect, but it's fine for a trade-off. Terrors of the Underroot is a normal trap card with the effect target up to 5 cards in your opponent's graveyard and the same number of your opponent's banished cards. Banish those targets from their graveyard, and if you do, return those banished targets to the graveyard. You can only activate 1 Terrors of the Underroot per turn. Essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to trade the graveyard with their banished zone. That's fine if the cards in the graveyard, which are more easily accessible, happen to be more powerful than the cards in the banished zone. Switching those out might be more effective for you, but it can also work the other way, and it's very niche. You would have to rely on your opponent really running between their banished pile and their graveyard, or being able to force certain cards into their banished pile to be able to trigger this effect. It's so niche that I can't actually think of any examples that would really work well with this. Perhaps Metaphys and maybe a couple of decks like that. You've got maybe the Helios line of cards as well. Gren Marsha Daiza is another classic example, but it's so odd a strategy. It's just so bizarre. I would not even know how to run this. Warrock Wento is a level 4 Earth Attribute Warrior type effect monster with 1800 attack and 1800 defense. The effect: if your Earth Attribute Warrior type monster battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation, as a quick effect, you can pay 800 life points. Your battling monster gains 800 attack until the end of this turn. If this card is sent from your monster zone to your graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon 1 level 5 or higher Warrock monster from your hand or deck. You can only use each effect of Warrock Wento once per turn. I like the design of this card. It helps to support your other Warrock monsters that all meet this condition with another 800 attack. That's not bad. It can be enough to defeat your opponent, especially since this can be activated during your opponent's battle phase. It's not limited to your turn, it can be used during either turn. So long as you're battling an opponent's monster, that's fine. The secondary ability is actually more used as a temptation. If your opponent is really sick of having to deal with this card's trigger effect, then they're going to want to try and use a card effect to destroy it. So in that case, they're actually punishing themselves, because then you're able to replace this with something which is very high in stats. It's very much Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's the style of deck the Warrocks are in terms of their archetype, but it's definitely enough to be able to get rid of your opponent. Warrock Mahmoud is a level 5 Earth Attribute Warrior type effect monster with 2000 attack and 2000 defense. If you control no monsters, or all monsters you control are warrior type monsters, you can normal summon this card without tributing. If your Earth Warrior monster battles after damage calculation, you can target 1 spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it. Then all Warrock monsters you currently control gain 200 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. You can only use this effect of Warrock Mahmoud once per turn. I love the design of this card. Okay, it's 2000 attack and defense, that's fine for a level 5. It can be instantly summoned if you have no monsters, or if your monsters are all basically Warrock monsters, and that's fine. And it doesn't even have to be that, it just has to be warrior type monsters. So if you're running this as just a tech card, that's also okay. It's able to rip your opponent's back row cards, which is nice. And the additional 200 attack points is also a decent boost. Not massive, but it can be enough to make the difference between winning and losing, and it can stop your opponent from activating cards which have a life point cost if their life points reach a point below that threshold. Warrock Meteor Dragon is a level 7 Earth Attribute Warrior type vet monster with 2600 attack and 2600 defense. The effect: it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. When an attack is declared involving this card and an opponent's monster, you can negate the effects of that opponent's monster this turn, as well as the activated effects and effects on the field of monsters with that same original name. Once per turn during a battle phase in which your Earth Attribute Warrior type monster battles, as a quick effect, you can make all Warrock monsters you currently control gain 200 attack until the end of your opponent's turn. Also, this card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase this turn. So what this card does is, it's one of the stronger ones out there. It does protect itself from any of your opponent's card effects from being destroyed, and it actually can shut down any monsters that happen to try and use their effects when you attack with this monster. It also has the ability to increase your monster's attack points by 200 and enables a double attack from this monster, hopefully ripping apart your opponent's defense and being able to do lots of damage in the process. Warrock Dignity is a quick play spell card with the effect you must control a Warrock monster to activate either of these effects. When a monster your opponent controls activates its effect, you can negate that effect. Or during the battle phase, when your opponent activates a spell or trap card or a monster effect, negate that effect. You can only activate one Warrock Dignity per turn. I love the design of this card. It's useful in two situations. It can firstly shut down your opponent's effect, and if it's one that happens on normal summon or when it's triggered, and it cannot be activated again, that's a way of stopping your opponent from going into some of their more consistent plays. Alternatively, this can be used when your monsters happen to be in the battle phase, and it shuts down any of your opponent's effects, which is nice, and it can put them on the back foot because maybe they're relying too heavily on that card's activation. Warrock Spirit is a quick play spell card with the effect during the battle phase, target one Warrock monster in your graveyard, then activate one of these effects. Special summon that target in attack position, but for the rest of its turn, its effects are negated, also it cannot attack directly. Or special summon that target in defense position, also the first time each Warrock monster you control would be destroyed by battle this turn, it is not destroyed. You can only activate one Warrock Spirit per turn. So depending on what you actually have in your graveyard is depending on what effect you want to rely on. If you summon it in attack position, you do lose the ability to have its effects or to attack directly. So if you do that during your turn, you might be able to attack over some of your opponent's monsters. Keep in mind that for that monster, you cannot attack directly, so it's always good to use that monster maybe first. If it's special summoned in defense position, it does provide each of your Warrocks with the one-time battle destruction protection for that turn, which might be enough if you're on the back foot to protect your life points and to protect your monsters. Warrock Generations is a normal trap card with the effect during the battle phase, if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, special summon one Warrock monster from your deck. And if you activated this card during your opponent's turn, for the rest of this turn, while you control the face-up special summon monster, your opponent's monsters cannot attack except to attack that monster. You can only activate one Warrock Generations per turn. So what this card does is it helps you interact with your opponent. It protects your other monsters because if it's during your opponent's battle phase, this can make the monster that you summon the target. So likely you're going to choose your strongest monster out there, and that way your opponent will either stop their attack to prevent themselves from losing any monsters or taking any damage, or they will go into that monster before they go into any of your others, and that might protect the other monsters that you might consider to be more key at that time. And the final card is Warrock Big Blow. This is a normal trap card with the effect during the main phase, if a face-up Warrock monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, destroy up to 2 cards your opponent controls. You can only activate one Warrock Big Blow per turn. Now, a number of the Warrock monsters actually have effects where if they're destroyed by card effect, they trigger their effects. So this might not be the best way to go about it. It might have been better if they just used it as destroyed by battle, because it is reliant on your opponent using a card effect rather than you being able to trigger it from your own effects, so you can't really do that. Unless, of course, you can give your opponent something that can use an effect, in which case it's treated as your opponent's card for the time being, but it's very conditional, and to destroy up to 2 cards is not necessarily worth it if you have to meet very specific conditions. It does mention here that there are going to be a number of crossover cards that are imported, so these include Diviner of the Herald, either the Sun Magician, Stay Sailor Romarine, DDD Super Sight King Zero Maxwell, Binary Blader, Sun Avalon Daphne, Sun Avalon Melius, and Sun Vine Crossbreed. So out of these cards, I do think there are a few favourable ones. My favourite is probably the top one, that's specific for just tribute monsters in general, and I think that's a great one. I don't necessarily think the one below it is actually that useful. It's probably my least favourite, the Thron, the Discipled Angel, because it has to be splashed into very specific types of decks, and it's just not worthwhile when you've got so many monsters that are level 4 that can special summon themselves so much easier, or special summon other versions much more easily. Simple things like Kage to Kage or Goblinberg come to mind. What cards do you like out of this, and which cards don't you like? Leave me a comment down below saying which ones you do prefer and why you do. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.